Welcome to this IF Oxford event, Beautiful Brains, where science meets art. It's a pleasure to have you all here, and I'm going to pass you on to Dr. Lizzie Burns, who we worked with a few times to explore different sorts of origami and art to get people thinking about crafting and neuroscience, and this is another one of those great events. So Lizzie, over to you.
Many thanks, Dane. It's fantastic to be here. So yes, this session is called Beautiful Brains. Maybe it's a bit of a surprising title. We tend not to think of the brain as being beautiful, but I'm hoping that in this session we can inspire you to actually get creative and find the beauty of what it does. The brain is astonishing, so there is beauty in that. The session will be quite informal. The idea is it's going to be relaxed conversation while getting creative. So I'm going to be leading some creative activities, but most of all, this session is a chance for you to meet a couple of neuroscientists, just to say, none of us are doctors. We're all scientists, so we can't answer questions as if we were doctors. The angle on this is also that this has been supported by Alzheimer's Research UK. So we want to inspire you about the brain, but also to find out maybe some of the changes that happen with dementia and the hopes for treatments in future. So I wonder, Emma, could you introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, of course. Hello, my name's Emma and I work at the University of Oxford at the Drug Discovery Institute, where I'm working to try and identify new drugs for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions.
Oh, many thanks. And Mark, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So my name's Mark. I'm a neuroscientist at the University of Reading. And similar to Emma, I'm interested in trying to unravel the mechanisms by which we progress to Alzheimer's disease, in the hope that we can offer future medicines in this particular area.
Many thanks. So this session, we really do want you to ask questions, but if you can do that through the chat box, and then I'll direct those questions to Emma and Mark. Just to say as well, if you have the chance, but we're not expecting that you've been able to do this, this session is linked to some activities that we have worked on ourselves for Alzheimer's Research UK. So either, if you haven't looked at it so far, not a problem. But if you wanted to look at this a bit later on, if you look under Alzheimer's Research UK under kids activities, these activities though are for every age, so do not be put off by the kids bit. So there's going to be 4 activities. I am going to guide you through ideas without having to print these out, but you might enjoy having a look at this a little bit later on. The final activity will actually be some origami, so I must make sure that I leave at least 20 minutes for us to do that. But if you can go and grab yourself some paper, some pens, colouring pencils, anything you've got to hand, because we're going to do effectively a bit of doodling while asking Emma and Mark lots of questions. So please make sure that's at hand. So we've got 4 activities. We're starting with the biggest topic and we're getting smaller and smaller to really find out about some of the changes, but also to appreciate this remarkable organ. So the whole brain, I don't know, Mark, can you tell us about the size of the brain? How heavy is this thing inside our heads?
Yeah, so it's quite a remarkable organ, as you say, Lizzie, and the average kind of adult brain weighs about 1.3 kilograms. So if you think about that as a couple of bags of sugar, or where we are in the calendar now, maybe a couple of medium-sized pumpkins in terms of sitting inside your head. And that is required in order for us to actually create all the connectivity that we're going to talk about, and Lizzie's going to demonstrate through her creativity.
Perfect. Right, I'm hoping that you've got those pieces of paper. So if you can, I would recommend that you start doodling some kind of a brain. You can look at these images and get inspired. If you had printed out a brain already, then you will be able to colour in the different sections. But as I said, if you haven't been able to print out, it's not a problem at all. Look at these images and get drawing yourself. That's what I'm going to be doing. And we'll ask Mark and Emma some questions at the same time. So the printed out one, you can actually do it on both sides and colour it in. So that might be something to try out another time as well. I'm going to get drawing. I'm curious about these different sections. So lobes, why are they called lobes? What's this all about? What does your brain do? There's a picture there, Mark, because I know Emma's going to tell us a lot more in the next slide about how they're like cities. So
yes, the kind of the regions of the brain are kind of split up into, as Liz said, different lobes, and that's just anatomical areas of the brain that people have identified that are responsible for different activities. So the sort of one that we've got on the screen at the minute, and I don't know if that's the one Lizzie's drawing, we've got different colored regions. So if we take the kind of purple region at the front of the brain, what we're calling that is, in essence, the frontal lobe. No clues as to why it's called the frontal lobe, because it's at the front of the brain. So again, just in terms of orientating ourselves, that's the front of the brain, and then conversely, we've got the blue area at the back of the brain. So the frontal lobe allows us really to do, excuse me, a lot of kind of executive function, think, plan, and solve problems. And it's this area that is included in terms of what is known as, in essence, the filtering of emotions. So again, it's really about who you are. And this particular region was kind of identified through people who've had accidents that have damaged the frontal lobe. So that's one way in which we've found out what different parts of the brain do, is through diseases or accidents where people have had parts of that brain injured or indeed parts of that brain removed. And then we can see how that actually manifests itself and how the people develop going forward in terms of that brain injury.
We have a question from Jacob. Is the picture that says creative brains, is that a real one on it? What do you think? Or Emma, do you think that's a real brain or not really? That image that we've got there.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of ways that we can image the brain now. And so the images that you see, the really brightly coloured ones at the top of the slide and also the bottom left, they are images of people's brains. So they serve to enable us to detect different structures in the brain that Mark was talking about and understand how bits of the brain communicate with each other as well. And at the bottom, where we see the two sort of hemispheres of the brain, the two sides, you can see that one is bigger than the other. And the larger side represents a kind of healthy brain, whereas the smaller side is the brain of a patient with a neurodegenerative condition. So yes, all of these images here are images of real brains.
They're kind of real, but are they how they would appear? Is it how your real brain would appear?
Well, not in colour.
That
would be amazing, wouldn't it, if your brain really was that beautifully coloured? But there are fantastic scanning techniques now which can put false colour onto the different parts of the brain, and that really kind of enables us to as I say, image different bits and see where the connectivity is occurring, and also to look for changes or damage that's occurred. So yes, whilst our brains aren't quite as colourful, they are real scans of real people's brains.
Yeah, and I think these tools are really kind of the way that we get an insight into people's brains. So if you think about how we start to look at the changes that occur over time or get a snapshot of the brain, some of the images that we see on screen are the way that scientists actually carry out experiments to look to see what the connectivity are, what parts of your brain talk to each other, and obviously thinking about disease, what areas are affected in disease, and then what areas maybe don't communicate as well under the disease process.
I'm getting very colourful here. I'm finding myself very much doodling while chatting. I hope that you're all finding that as well. It's such a great subject, and actually the colours in these images have real meaning, don't they? Showing the connections. It is data as well as them looking very beautiful too. Maybe we should move on and keep us looking at more images of the brain. So we started the whole brain. Emma, I know that you've been working with a amazing designer, Heather Savage. and she's been creating a sort of image of the brain as if it's a city. Seeing whether I can forward the slide. Let me see. How interesting. It's not changing the slide at the moment. Maybe next. There we go. My brain knows what to do. So yeah, we've got this idea of the brain as a city. There's a lovely image there. And also, again, this is something, if you haven't been able to print out, it's not a problem. Doodle the brain as a city, so make up your own one. If you are able to print it out, it's a sort of corrugated brain, and one way is quite dark and the other way shows a very different image of the city, one that's very bright. Can you tell us about this brain city idea?
Yeah, well, in the way that cities are always on the go and people are moving around cities all the time, they never really kind of stop. Your brain is exactly the same. It's always working in one way or another. And that's really, to just help you kind of live and also, kind of learn new things, move, remember, speak, and, the whole variety of kind of things that make you, you. So your brain is really, really busy all the time. And in a city, you have kind of buildings and also kind of roads and lanes and pavements and pathways that connect those buildings together. And cities really depend on that kind of communication and interaction. And that's exactly how your brain works. We have a really good kind of connectivity between cells in the brain called neurons. And they pass chemical messages between each other to help you form new memories, or as I say, do a variety of other things that you may want to do. So they kind of really help to make your body run and also make you be able to think and process ideas, speak, see things, and understand the world around you. So you see the cars and the people on the roads, they kind of represent those chemical messages that are moving between buildings to really keep the city running and to keep your brain functioning well. Now, in a city, you make rubbish. That's natural. It's normal that, waste is produced. And that's exactly the same thing that happens in your brain. So it's completely normal for cells to die in your brain. But in the way that cells die, the debris or the waste is also kind of cleared up. And, in a city, that's done by rubbish men, garbage collectors. But in the brain, it's done by some really specialized cells called microglia. And these go around and make sure that your brain is in tip-top condition, really healthy and working well. However, when people become unwell with neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease, those cells sometimes don't function very well and they become unable to collect up the rubbish. So the waste accumulates in the brain and that causes blockages in the roads or the pathways, the axons that connect neurons to each other. And when this happens, you end up with the cycle of more cell death, and that causes the break in the connections, which leads to these symptoms that you see in neurodegenerative diseases, such as loss of memory and kind of inability to sort of look after yourself well, or, do the things that you would like to do. Obviously, the key kind of hallmark of Alzheimer's disease is that memory. But there are also a number of other symptoms, including kind of problems with vision and also issues around spatial awareness as well, amongst many other things. So, in the way that a city functions with all of these different kind of, people and buildings working together, your brain really does function by all of the cells working together to maintain a really good, healthy environment. And that's really important.
Thank you so much. So I guess in sort of the next activities that we'll be doing, we'll maybe think about some of those changes to cells and what it is that's going wrong. It's quite an interesting analogy, isn't it? A city, this change and movement and connection and busyness. It's a constant effort, really, looking after a brain, after a city. And
yeah, it takes a lot of effort, definitely.
Is it? I seem to remember reading a while back that about a fifth of your food goes to your brain. I don't know whether that's how correct that is, but it's an interesting.
Yeah, you definitely need to fuel yourself well to look after your brain. It's really important, and as you say, Lizzie, it's a lot of your energy goes into making sure your brain functions well. So. definitely make sure you're eating all the right foods.
Yeah, and I guess it's also about looking after ourselves, isn't it? How do you keep your brain healthy? Which, from what I understand, it's a similar lessons of looking after your heart.
Absolutely, that's right. Yeah.
So lots of exercise, not smoking, not drinking too much. Yeah, eating good balanced diet, not too much fatty foods. Anything else, Emma,
I think you've covered everything, to be honest. That's right. You have to think, the food that, or the activities and the food that looks after your heart really does look after your brain. So it's definitely worth thinking about it as a whole.
Yeah.
Sticking with the city analogy, it's like pollution. So you're starting to kind of pollute the environment that your brain lives in, and that can, as sort of Emma's already sort of suggested, that can block up the connectivity, but it also has impact on blood flow. So one of the things that's bringing all that energy to your brain is the blood that brings in the nutrients and then that serves the nerve cells. But if you get that, in essence, reduced through any kind of lifestyle choices, it's going to have an impact on the ability for that city to maintain its high level of activity and also that kind of high level of kind of waste collection.
Mm-hmm. So maybe if we go on to the sort of building blocks of our brain, this is a really nice analogy, but doesn't quite tell us yet as to how it works. I've been sort of adding an extra city to my brain. I quite enjoyed adding some C to it as well. Maybe an aeroplane. I think these are just ideas that come out of our brains. So on to the kind of nuts and bolts of our brain, like the rest of our body, made of these things called cells. The word cell really originally came from many hundreds of years ago from Robert Hooke, who was here in Oxford at one point as well. And he looked down a microscope and saw these little rooms. So we hear the word cell from prison cell, but at the time I was thinking about monk's room as a little room. He actually saw them in cork, looking at a little piece of cork, but asked the question, are other things made of these little cells? And that inspired others. So it was his artwork, actually, his drawings of cells that inspired others to look. So brain cells, neurons, they're very distinctive. They're very beautiful, aren't they? I'm sure most of you would have heard of neurons. These are particular. Is it right that these are particular cells from the area of the brain to do with forming memories? Emma or Mark, would you like to add anything to these images? Again, get drawing, get doodling. I'd start a new piece of paper for this, or you may have printed it out, in which case you could use that, but otherwise just be inspired by these images, get experimenting. Yes, please, Emma.
Yeah, that's right, Lizzie. They are, really highly specialized cells. They have a really important job to do to ensure that there's a good communication with, in your brain. And also there are different types of neurons in different parts of the brain that have a really specialized function as well. So some will be a bit more involved in maintaining and creating new memories, and others will be a little bit more specialized so that they are involved in movement, for example. So yes, they sometimes look a little bit different. So some of them have lots of different branches from either side of the cell body, which you can see in the left-hand image. And some of them have these really long kind of projections or arms, and they'll be reaching out to cells that are maybe a bit further away from their neighbors. So yes, they do a variety of different jobs. If you have anything you want to add there.
Yeah.
No, sorry, Lizzie. Just picking up on what Emma said. So yeah, we've got kind of different, in essence, characteristics of neurons that exist in different regions of the brain, and one of the areas that we were interested in is obviously the hippocampus, and that's an area that's involved in kind of memory formation and retention. And we know that in disease, the neurons, the nerve cells within that area, are particularly susceptible to disease. So that's one area of research, is trying to understand why those particular nerve cells are ones that are lost more frequently than cells in other areas of the brain.
Curious, yeah. And I guess you're trying to find answers. Any answers?
Well, not any big answers that we can reveal this Saturday evening, unfortunately. But yes, we're working towards that. And there's a whole host of proteins and building blocks within these individual cells that we think makes them more susceptible to disease and toxic stimuli. And the hope is that you could uncover a drug or a molecule that could, in essence, protect that cell from that disease process, and so offer protection against the neurodegeneration or the neuronal loss that we see as part of the disease process.
Mm-hmm. It is completely mind-boggling to think that all your thoughts, your feelings, your memories are all conveyed through these little tiny cells talking to each other. Do correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I seem to remember reading around 100 billion brain cells, neurons, and each can have thousands of connections with other cells. So it's truly hard to imagine, but lovely to try to. On the far right, you can see a lovely image, which is actually, I think it's a computer model bringing together different microscope images, and that feeling of this almost jungle of branches. And I guess when you're looking down the microscope, if you're looking at lots of cells, it would just look like a mass. So you have to use a dye which brings out but just a few, because if you stain them all, they would be, again, hard to disentangle these threads. So they just look so beautiful, don't they? They do look delicate as well. If you're to draw a cell, we've got a question here from Lincoln. What is the difference between creative cells and nerve cells? This first image is actually of neurons, of nerve cells. The creative cells is encouraging you to get creative. So your own cells are allowing you to get creative, but there aren't, in scientific terms, there aren't creative cells. For every cell, you tend to have a nucleus, so your DNA is inside there. Can you see a little round thing? It's almost like a little head, and then all of these branches. So with your doodlings, add more and more branches. They have lots. But something I was really found very curious with this project is that we think of neurons, brain cells, but there are other cells as well. I wonder if you can tell a little bit more about these different cells. Here's some pictures as well to inspire. Maybe you can start adding them over the neurons as well. Mark, can you add anything? These 3 different types of cells.
Yeah, so the other cell types that are really getting the interest of scientists are what we once believed were glue. So in essence, they originated as the glial cells, so using the word glue. And in essence, people thought they were just what stuck the nerve cells together. It was almost kind of a structural glue that held it in place, that gave us the shape of the brain that we've seen previously in the slides. But as science and technology has developed, there's been a growing interest in the different types of cells that make up this family of glial cells. And we now know that there's different members of that family, and they contribute to different tasks. So Emma's already mentioned the microglial cells, and I think will pass the baton back to her in a bit to talk a little bit more about them. But in essence, the oligodendrocytes and the astrocytes are other members of this glial family. So astrocytes, in essence, take their name from stars. So they're, in essence, star-shaped. So if we look down the microscope into, in essence, a dish of astrocytes, we would see a collection of stars. And we know that they are, in essence, acting as hoovers within the brain. So if you think about Henry Hoover or your Dyson at home, that's what in essence, astrocytes doing. It's mopping up some of the chemicals that are being spilt out by the nerve cells. So here we have a cell that's, in essence, supporting nerve cells, but now we know that actually, even more than supporting them, they're actually playing a proactive role in maintaining the connections between the nerve cells. So some of the pictures we saw previously about that forest of connections, astrocytes are ever important in keeping those connections active and working in a healthy brain.
So are these the cells that link in, Emma, to the brain city idea of the kind of garbage collectors?
Yeah, astrocytes certainly play a role in kind of, as Mark says, ensuring that neurons are healthy. But microglia are also, well, perhaps more heavily involved in clearing up waste in the brain. So microglia have a really specialized role in performing a process called phagocytosis, which means to take up and engulf anything that isn't seen as something that should be present in the brain. So that includes dying cells, but also protein that accumulates in the brain in disease, such as amyloid beta or tau tangles, and these are found in Alzheimer's disease. So microglia kind of sense the changes. They sense these dead cells, which send out signals that basically say, eat me, and the microglia move over to those dead cells or the areas of this accumulated kind of damage in the brain, and they sort of digest it all up and kind of clear up all the waste, really. So it's exactly, you know, as I say, as the garbage collectors in the city, they're playing a really important role in keeping the brain nice and clean and healthy, and you know, making sure that there's nothing kind of sitting there that shouldn't be, that may potentially cause damage to those really fragile neurons.
So is there something which you'd expect all over the body, but it's just that neurons do need to completely work, or else you're going to start to notice problems?
Yeah, well, microglia are a sort of special type of a cell that you have in the rest of your body called a macrophage. And in the rest of your body, these cells do exactly the same job. They clear up any sort of any damage, really, you know, that you might get from an infection, or, you know, things like that. When you sort of hurt yourself, macrophages come in and they make sure that the other cells in the body stay nice and healthy. But in the brain, these macrophages are called microglia, and they have that really specialized role of protecting the neurons specifically, rather than any other cell. So yeah, they're very important.
So is it like, if you, I don't know, if you're a child, you fall over, you've got a little cut and it goes a bit kind of a bit leaky after a while, you know, is that the same kind of cells?
Yeah,
you know?
that's right. So, you know, if you cut yourself and you get a bit of a, you know, sort of a swelling, a bit of redness, as you say, Lizzie, maybe a bit of an infection in there, then macrophages in your body will do the job of kind of clearing that up. So yeah, it's exactly the same in the brain. You know, if you have some damage in the brain, the microglia, the brain macrophages will rush over and try and protect it.
Wow. Mark?
Yeah, no, I like to pick it up on the kind of the story that's evolving. And in terms of disease processing, I think we think now the finger is pointing at these cells being kind of early indicators of disease. So well before the kind of nerve cells that we characterize the neurodegenerative diseases with, so the kind of brain scans that you saw previously showing the differences between a healthy brain and that has, for example, Alzheimer's disease. That's in essence, once the disease has been diagnosed, the disease is taking hold, people are starting to show those outward symptoms that we are so familiar with in terms of dementia. However, we think that some of the cells on screen here, the astrocytes, the microglia and oligodendrocytes, might actually be early detectors. So a lot of the scientists now are trying to understand the biology of these cells, what they do in a healthy brain, what they do as we age, get older, and then why we could potentially target them to actually benefit people who are going to go on and suffer from neurodegenerative diseases.
Wow, just the intricacies of our body. We just never know what's going on inside us. It never ceases to just amaze. And how the microscope gives us this sense of this hidden, beautiful world. These colours feel so right too, don't they? I often think somehow the brain should be colourful. I reckon we might as well move on to the final activity, actually, because this all links, we were saying about mopping up these bits of protein, bits of rubbish that we could get rid of that are actually needed to keep your brain healthy. So it really takes us strangely onto origami, because actually our DNA encodes proteins, and it's the way that they're almost a bit like long beads, and it's the way that they fold up that gives them the structure and then the job. So it's all about folding. It's a bit like origami, really. And I've got a few images on the left of this tiny little protein fragment. So I don't know if you can tell me more about this. This is to do with dementia, isn't it? Emma, would you like to answer?
Yeah, that's right. So as I mentioned previously, there are proteins in the brain that are kind of hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease, and they are seen in an individual's brain when they become unwell, and these are called amyloid. So these proteins are really sticky, and they are kind of found sort of inside the brain, and they all kind of clump together, and they kind of prevent the neurons from interacting well with each other by the fact that they create these big sort of clumps in the brain, really kind of big aggregates, we call them. So it's really important that we can maybe find a way to clear some of these aggregates to enable us to help people with dementia to be able to kind of, to stop the disease from progressing. Really, we want to make sure that we can help promote the kind of clearance of these aggregates so that people don't become more unwell and sort of develop further through the disease. So they're very kind of key parts of dementia.
So it's really trying to understand at the tiniest scale what's going wrong. I always imagine them like fortune tellers. Here I've stacked some up, because you're saying about the stacking up. It forms a rather lovely pattern. And actually these drawings, which again you will find amongst those activities if you look at those links, are drawings that I've done based on scientific sort of images, which show these sort of beautiful clumping really of proteins, and they rather look gorgeous, like mandalas really. So it's kind of also finding the beauty at every level. But I thought what we could do together, and actually I wonder whether Emma and Mark, whether you might join me in just a moment. I will actually be switching off this background of images and thought I'd try teaching you both, as well as everybody here, how to fold a piece of origami. And it's a rather beautiful one. This is the one that you chose. I gave Emma and Mark a choice. It's called a twisty rose, which is from an origamist called Suzuki, a Japanese origamist. And it starts off lots of folds. It starts off quite smooth, a bit like our brain would start off in development, small and smooth. And then it starts twisting and becoming more complex, which in a way also our body becomes more and more complex the more you get into it. So if you grab yourself an A4 piece of paper, and I will show you first of all how to make a square, and then I will take you through this whole journey, which maybe will be a new experience for both of you, Emma and Mark, and everybody here. I've actually been doing an awful lot of origami over this time. It's also about exercising your brain. I think the spatial side of this is quite difficult. And actually that's something that can be affected as well with dementia, isn't it? So maybe this could be a therapeutic tool. Who knows? But it's certainly a good thing to do. And Dane, you're going to join us as well with some origami? Yes. Oh, brilliant. You're going to make a yellow rose. Okay, cool. So if you grab a piece of paper, and any point you need repeating, I'll go nice and slowly, but if there's any point you need repeating, please put in the chat box. So I'm going to take a corner and I'm going to bring it down to that lower edge. Take your time with origami. I'm trying to line it up through that corner. So my 3 rules for origami. The first one is if you start well, it continues well. Start badly, it gets worse and worse. And I guess in a way with dementia too, it's those little clumps of protein produce more and more of a mess. So start off well, it will continue well, it will keep healthy. My second rule is to give good, strong folds actually, because it's the folds that will give it the strength. Everything will work well. Again, keeping our brains working nicely. My third rule, it's not really a rule, just to say it's meant to be fun. So don't take it too seriously, which is also part of being creative too. So hopefully underneath here, you've got a square, but we need to remove a rectangle. So you could cut that off. I actually do it by tearing. So I'm turning it over, lifting it up, bringing it back and squashing it down carefully. And I quite like that we're doing this from A4 because you'll get a really nice big rose at the end of this. Good strong fold. If you've got a good strong fold, if you have nails, use them. And then we can tear this off. And if you're at all able to multitask, Emma or Mark, you are welcome to, I don't know, tell me about how you got into science or whether your brain isn't able to do this many things at once.
Yeah, well, I'll maybe take a break from the origami and have some career advice.
Perfect. So we've got one diagonal. We'll do the other diagonal as well. Sorry, but yes, Mark, please do while we're chatting. So Dane, you've got that there. We open it and we're going to do the other diagonal. Right. Yes, please, Mark, tell us about career-wise being a neuroscientist.
Yeah, I mean, sort of being through school and going to university, I was always interested in kind of structure and function, which kind of nicely ties into kind of today's session. And it's that brought me to kind of think about the brain. And very much when you're at school and university, even, it's a black box. Nobody really knows what it is that we're trying to control or controls our everyday movements. And that kind of inspired me to go on and learn a little bit more and go back to university and be that eternal student and do a PhD in neuroscience.
Learning is such a great thing. I think that's what I've been enjoying about origami, actually, because I can learn new things all the time with this. So just to make sure that everyone's with us, you have hopefully started with a square which had a diagonal, opened it up, and then I did the other diagonal. So is everybody with me, first of all? Great. Oh, that looks good, Emma. Yep. So our next step is to turn it over. And actually, it's quite crucial because it's all about the direction of folds. So it was that way up, going inwards. I turned it over so it's like a tent. And what we'll do is we'll do a horizontal and a vertical line. And what got you kind of so curious about the brain? Was there anything in particular, Mark?
Well, I don't think my mum will thank me for saying this live online and all that, but no. So she was a nurse, and she was a nurse in a neurological ward. So she came back with stories of people that she'd been looking after and the impact that any kind of slight brain injury or untold brain injury could have on that person's behavior, outward appearance, and who they actually are as a person. And that really kind of sort of drove me to find out more about what's inside our heads that we're chatting about this afternoon.
Yeah, fantastic. Actually, I don't know whether any of you have read the book, but it's so worth reading. Oliver Sacks' book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. What a remarkable title. It is a remarkable book, and literally, in this case, particular damage to the brain that had happened meant that this man literally thought his wife was a hat. It's impossible to imagine how your brain completely dictates in many ways how you react to the world, how you see and understand it. But it's really fascinating. It really makes you think. It's a beautiful book, I think, with real sympathy and kindness towards people as well. Emma, are you at this stage, Dane? Yeah, brilliant. Lovely. So as it is, it probably turns upwards a little bit. Can you see mine is turning upwards? Dane, no, yours is good. It looks like it's okay. What I want you to do is to put your finger underneath the middle of it and push. And it sort of pops into another position. And I imagine as well that proteins would sort of pop into different positions as well. So actually, Dane, I think yours was already in a triangle position. So if you turn it, that's it. You want it so it's like a triangle. Now pull the sides in and then squash it down. So actually over this time I've been supporting wellbeing. So I work one day a week in a hospital, UCH in London, and I've been working on staff wellbeing and patient wellbeing and origami. That's right, Dane. Looks like that's great. So it should look like a triangle. So I've been showing a fold every week. So if you do at all find that you get stuck on this one or want to do some more, take a look under YouTube for my name, Dr. Lizzie Burns. You'll see it's like a whole library of folds. So there's twisty roses in there. So it should look like this. Your next step is to take bottom corner and bring it up to the top. Again, be nice and exact. It's very much science, isn't it? That attention to detail. And having to be very careful, which is very pleasing. I think we like order, don't we? Yes, that's correct, Dane. Thank you. And the same with the other corner as well. That's it. And what I do like about origami online is that it's very physical, and actually we're all doing this together, so you sort of forget the screen for a little bit. Lovely, excellent. So at the moment we've got these sort of loose flaps at the top. I want you to take one of these loose flaps and put your finger in there. Can you wait a minute? Yes, Jacob, where are you? Are you at the triangle stage? Did you get there? There's lots to learn, isn't there? This has to be good for your brain. So it was that triangle. So it was originally needs to cut something. Oh, you're many steps behind then, I think. Yes, cut off that strip. You need to do your diagonal lines on one side, turn it over and do your horizontal and vertical. This is all being filmed as well, being recorded, so it does mean you can go back to it. So I may keep us gently moving, but you'll be able to come back to it. So don't worry if you're not keeping up with it all. You will be able to do it. I think it's about being very kind to yourself, knowing you will eventually get there. Right, so we're going to take the bottom corner and bring it up to the top, and the same with the other. And then putting your finger into one of these flaps and squashing it down to make a square. So it was up here. Put your finger in, it's a way of just opening it up a bit and squashing it down so it all is lined up. I think the key is to go nice and slowly. So it probably feels like a lot to take on board. That's it. Lovely. And the same on the other one. That's it. So finger in there, squash it down. So actually this is a hard one to multitask. So we can chat away, but you probably won't be able to take it in because you're having to concentrate so much. And actually it's the beauty of origami is it means that you completely focus just on this, which can be quite relaxing. Great. So if we turn it, lovely. Oh, some good questions coming in as well. So I don't know whether Mark, you're more the up for helping. We've got a couple of questions from John. Can you tell us more about mental health and the brain? Music, how does music affect the brain? What bits of the brain are affected by music? Do you know anything about that, Mark?
Yeah, mental health's not my area of expertise, but we know that there's different areas that are affected for particular diseases. So whether it's anxiety, whether it's depression, there's particular changes in the neurochemistry of the brain. So some of those chemicals we talked about that the cells are trying to deal with gets changed. And that's where some of the medicines come in, some of the drugs and medicines that are used to manage some of these conditions under the kind of mental health umbrella target some of those chemicals. They target some of the nerve cells, some of the astrocytes, and some of the microglia. So it's thinking about what particular symptoms that individual's displaying to try and treat them and manage that particular condition. So that's my stab at mental health.
And the music side, I mean, clearly it brings in so much, doesn't it? It encourages movement, it brings in emotions, it brings in memories. I mean, is this appreciating the kind of whole complexity of our own brains? And that's why we enjoy it so much.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole kind of plethora of literature out there looking at music and brain function. There's a lot of studies looking at, if we're sticking with dementia and Alzheimer's research, thinking about people listening to soundtracks of their youth to try and spark and try and build some of those connections that have maybe been lost. So music has a really important role to play in mood, but also in essence strengthening the connection. So maybe listening to that particular soundtrack that you used to listen to when you were a teenager and stuck in your bedroom, or when you were out learning to drive with your mum and dad in the car, whatever, those kind of memories are kind of linked to that kind of music. So that soundtrack is almost, that music is almost a trigger to then sort of recall. And then that has a whole host of kind of effects on your physiology. So again, you might go red, you might see some blood flow changes, and your whole body responds to that kind of music, not only your brain itself. So in terms of particular areas, it really depends on what aspect you're talking about. As Lizzie said, it's movement, it's the kind of motor cortex, it's thinking about how you actually, whether you dance like a dad or whether you dance like someone who is actually coordinated, that's the kind of areas of the brain that are linked to some of the music aspects.
Oh, many thanks. Right, I better keep us moving on the origami as well. Sorry, it is really hard to multitask or asking questions, and but we'll come back to more questions in a moment. Let me keep us moving. So if we turn it around to the other side, we are going to do the same thing. So taking the corner and bring it up to the top. So it will end up looking like a square. And again, the same thing, putting your finger into that flap, squashing it down, keeping it all lined up, and seeing if we can make that shape. So I'll ask another question, if I may. Again, this comes from another participant. Is the beta amyloid protein, oh, hang on, I just lost it there. Is the beta amyloid protein accumulation a result of microglia malfunction in Alzheimer's disease? Goodness, I think somebody knows what they're talking about here. I don't know, Emma, if you'd like to say anything there.
Yeah, sure. That's a really great question, and I think that it's actually quite difficult to answer that, because we know that in Alzheimer's disease we see that there's beta amyloid accumulated in the brain, but we actually don't really know in many ways kind of really the reason why that happens and why it's there. It's what we call a hallmark. So it's present and it's used as a way to diagnose somebody with Alzheimer's disease. Microglia certainly play a really important role in clearing up the amyloid beta, and microglia do go wrong in disease. They sometimes don't function as well as we expect them to, so that causes the A beta to accumulate, and sometimes they kind of become a little bit overactive, and that causes them to start to degrade healthy structures in the brain that help with connection of neurons. So yes, the accumulation of beta amyloid can be due to the fact that microglia have stopped performing their waste collection duties particularly well. And that does certainly happen as the disease progresses. So one of the things that we're looking to do at the Drug Discovery Institute is perhaps think of a way that we might try and harness those protective capacities of microglia to degrade waste, and try and kind of push microglia to do that a little bit more, but in a kind of sensible way, so that they just take up the amyloid beta and they kind of protect the neurons without going a bit haywire and sort of taking up healthy parts of the brain as well. So that's our goal, really, to try and kind of boost that protective microglial function so that they mop up the excess beta amyloid.
Back to the origami. I want to make sure we manage to get this done. So at the moment, I hope it looks like this front and back. It reminds me, again, this is how our brain works. It reminds me of, for me, the Bake Off tent. I don't know if you will enjoy Bake Off, but it looks a little bit like that. So our next step is to take the corner in the middle and bring it up to the top. It's all, or maybe it's like opening a circus tent and squashing it down up there. So if you can do that on both sides and turn it over on the back and do the same thing. Again, we'll try to multitask. A question for either of you, Emma or Mark, from Sarah. Can stressful situations harm the brain and strengthen it? And how does that work? Wow. Any thoughts?
Yes, so stress is quite a kind of hot topic in terms of brain research, and it's understanding what the trigger are. So similar to kind of what we're talking about mental health, stress is quite a broad spectrum in terms of what that stressful stimulus is. And we know that, in essence, short-term stress can actually be beneficial to the brain. So it can build and strengthen some of those connections. So scientists like myself and Emma often work to deadlines. So it's working up that pressure, that stress, your body reacts, and it starts to, in essence, increase the blood flow. You start to get a change in the neurochemistry in your brain, which supports you actually being sort of physically active and mentally active in terms of cognition, and then be able to meet those kind of deadlines. If you think about that longer term, in essence, your brain's going to crash. It's going to then start to, in essence, fail at the job it's meant to be doing. And that's why kind of long-term stress, strains of whether that be work-related or whether that be lifestyle, etc., have an impact on brain function.
Brilliant. And I guess as well, stress can be useful, but if prolonged, isn't a great thing. So it's important to find ways to relax. Maybe if I do this relaxing, or maybe you're not. But hopefully after a while, sometimes as well, something like origami, I think you have to put in, actually, there is a certain frustration and a focus, maybe a little bit of stress, but then you're releasing it there rather than in other situations, and then feel relaxed and happy afterwards. So I guess it's about finding a balance, isn't it? Ways that you can unwind. Sport's often a good way, or going out for a walk. Again, it's all about well-being, really, isn't it? As much as you can lessen stress when it's not needed, because it could otherwise maybe not be so good for you. I hope you've managed to do this front and back. That's great. I can see some young participants there. Right, so there's a sort of point at the bottom. I want you to take that, and we're going to lift it up and fold it into that gap. It just fits in nicely there, really. You're managing to do this as well, Mark. It looks like you're busy. You're doing your best.
Yeah, I've not got the confidence to share it on screen as Emma and Dane have, but I'm doing my best.
You're well done. It's about that positive attitude. And again, on the other side, you'll find the same thing, lifting that piece up, tucking it into the gap. Actually, over this time, I've been designing some of my own origami. I used to think you have to be incredibly clever to come up with new origami, but I think of it as evolution. There is no foresight as to what you're going to create. You don't necessarily know. You're just prepared to experiment with folds. So if you sit there and start playing with folds, things will emerge. Most of them maybe don't work, but some of them will. And actually, I found myself designing that way, which has been such fun. It's just about being a little bit brave. So it should look like this. Now, if you think of this as leaves of a book, if you can just turn the leaf of your book, and you'll end up with the smooth side. And if you turn it round to the back and do the same thing, again, I should keep us moving, so we definitely finish this in time. There we go. You're welcome, Zaira. That's it. So it should look like this, smooth on both sides. You can almost see a little trace of a line there. I'm going to take the bottom corner and bring it up to the top. Is this making sense? Emma or Mark or Dane, if anything doesn't make sense, you speak up as well if you need me to show things. So it's that bottom corner, lifting it up. And you will find, again, you might recognise that shape of a little bit sticking down. So as with before, taking that and lifting it up, and it will again fold into that little gap. Did you get that? So it's on that smooth side, lifting it up, bringing it up there, and then that's it. Thanks, Dave. Great to have that extra level of demonstration there. I reckon you do lots of origami in your spare time, do you? That's it, turning it around to the back. And the same thing, taking the bottom corner, lifting it up. I like to think of origami as it's helping with your resilience, your taking a positive attitude to doing something new. I think it's that plasticity that our brain has, the ability to adapt and to change, but to be quite playful and fun about it at the same time, not to take it too seriously. I think we're animals of play, really. That's how we learn well. This bottom corner, lifting it up. So hopefully what you've got is something that almost looks like a little boat like that. We're getting there. We definitely need our full concentration here. So as you've got it, if you had that point at the top, as Dane had, and we're going to take the bottom, what we're going to do is we're going to lift up the bottom. So it's down here, lifting it up, and it's spreading out the bottom of this. it's quite tough, but what I want you to do is to squash it down to make the square. It's a whole piece of engineering, isn't it? So it was down here and I lifted that up, and it's quite tough to spread it out. Emma, is that working for you? Looks like concentration. Oh, that's it, Jane.
Yes, it's. I think I got lost a bit somewhere, but I might have got it back again.
So does it look like this?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. So lifting the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy to do, and you should be able to squash it up.
Okay, yeah.
Triangles inside you have to squash down. We're almost there. Oh, Jane's getting there. What? Oh, you're a natural. Doesn't come naturally to most, myself included. I have to encourage myself a lot. So at the moment, that's it, Emma. You've got a little square. If you put that square on your hand and just think of this as almost like a sail of a boat. I just want you to have this pointy bit sticking up. I find it very hard to us put this into words. So you've got the square there, and you've got your sort of almost like your sail of your boat there. Now, as you look down on this, can you see there's sort of four sides to it? So pop that square on your hand and then get your fingers. So it's almost going to be that you're going to slot your fingers in there, into those gaps. Can you see? I'm putting my fingers into the gaps there. This is the point where you can't see, can you? But if you push your fingers so that they're surrounding each gap, and then what you're going to do is twist in one direction, the bottom of the square will curve upwards and change. So, and just let it do that. It is like a piece of magic. You should be able to twist and twist and twist and twist. The flower. A very hard one to demonstrate because it was, it just does it, or it. Which part of our brain controls the concentration? It's the frontal lobes. Am I right about that, Mark? Or it's certainly important. And that's the last area of your brain to develop, and probably not until you're in your 20s. And that's probably why kids find it very hard to concentrate, and why something like this is probably rather good, because you're encouraging Emma, it works. Dave, how about for you, Mark? Don't worry. Oh, brilliant. Cool. Yes, it's getting there. It's unique. I hope it's worked for others. Wow. Oh, brilliant, Alison. That looks amazing. Woohoo. The sense of achievement. Yes, what part of our brain controls our concentration? I think, yeah, frontal lobes. And I seem to remember that because of this example Mark was saying about where areas of the brain have not been working for someone, it affects somebody. So the very famous example, someone called Phineas Gage, and he was working on the railways, metal rod was using for pushing dynamite in, not a good idea, but anyway, it exploded and this piece of metal flew through the front of his head out the other side. You would expect to die from that, but he didn't. He was awake and managed to get himself to a doctor, said, I've got some work for you. Then passed out for quite a while. Amazingly, he didn't have an infection. He got better, but he changed. And he went from being a really nice, kind, decent person to someone who'd be angry, couldn't concentrate on anything. And it was the front of his brain. He couldn't concentrate. So that's how I'm thinking of that. Anyway, I think we've come to the end of our session, and it looks like beautiful things have happened for you. I hope they have for all of you. And this has been recorded, so you can have a go again. Be persistent, being kind to yourself. I don't know, Emma, Mark, Dane, if there's anything you'd like to finish the session with.
No, just thanks for joining, and hopefully it's kind of inspired you to get creative and think about really, I guess, the complexities of the brain. We've only really scratched the surface in our session today, and that's really what me and Emma are sort of plundering on away with in terms of our careers. Oh,
well, I hope you unravel more and more, and that does give hope as well for the future. Thank you, Dane, as well, for hosting this.
Thanks everyone for joining. I really did enjoy the question, what's the difference between, or what are creative selves and what are nerve cells? I think there's something deeply profound about such a simple question, because obviously we can touch things with our hands, and our hands don't necessarily feel like they're doing thinking, but they're still controlled by nerves. And the thinking cells in our brains are similar, and they're the creative ones, aren't they? So, and we've all done that together with making these lovely origami flowers. So thanks so much, Lizzie, for helping us through the crafting. And thanks so much for Mark and Emma to walk us through some of the neuroscience. And it's been great fun seeing all of you here today. This will be going up online. So if you've missed some of the folds, you can watch again, or of course you can go to Lizzie's website. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming. We'll see you again at another event. Bye-bye for now.
Many thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.